Okay, so we are going to have a discussion about autism in the context of genomics. This is by no means an all inclusive lecture on autism. You would have to have that content in pediatrics or community health. But we'll talk about it in terms of genomics because it is one of the areas of research. Um, so, one of the things that I wanted to call your attention to is that autism is not a single disease or disorder. It does fall under a diagnostic category, it's very broad. Um, but it's got multiple causes that are possible and multiple presentations. If you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. You have not met them all, for sure. Um, when we talk about things like cystic fibrosis and other single gene disorders or disorders that are more clear cut, chromosomal disorders, trisomy X or whatever, um, a lot of times we look at something very clear cut. Um, a disorder that it involves global cognitive, social functioning. Um, you think about how complex human behavior, human language, human cognition are. It's regulated by multiple genes. So autism is very interesting from a genomic standpoint. So what is autism? Just a review of what you should have learned in other coursework. It's a developmental disorder that emerges before the age 3. It's not always diagnosed by age 3. Prevalence now is 1 in 44 children. Boys to girls, 4 to 1. Nationwide, it's 2.27% of boys. The disorder that was formerly known as Asperger's disorder, which no longer exists as a category, a separate category, was 14 to 1 boys to girls. It does represent a spectrum, which includes a wide range of features and a degree of function or disability. Some people at the milder end, and we call them neurodiverse. It's not necessarily a disorder. It's sort of a set of characteristics that color and define them as people, but they function at very high levels. Think of Elon Musk. Think of Temple Grandin, Dan Aykroyd. Those folks are less severely affected. And then we have people who are in residential care and have to be maintained there for their own safety because they bang their heads, or for other people's safety because they express their behaviors as physical aggression. So there's a very wide category, and it presents in a lot of different ways. It used to be classified as separate disorders. Now it fits into one big umbrella, and that umbrella is separated out into level 1, high function with support. These folks might need a little help with organization and planning and social skills, but generally they are capable of achieving a normal quality of life. In fact, some of them might be, very highly suited to things that society needs. Level 2 requires substantial support, and these folks can usually be maintained in the home or in the community, but they need help and services they will not achieve at that level. And level 3 requires very substantial support. These are folks that a lot of times, unfortunately, do end up in residential care, or if they're maintained in the home or community, they need 24-hour support. Features of autism. Autism affects social interaction, so you have a social impairment. Failure to recognize social cues and respond appropriately. Failure to behave according to social norms. There are social contracts, the unwritten rules of human behavior. They don't perceive these, and so they violate those little social contracts. Some people have very limited interests or topics of conversation if they are verbal. And that impedes normal social interaction because other people don't respond positively to that. And then some behaviors, we talk about stimming in a few minutes. These could be socially alienating to others. They don't follow the normal rules of social engagement, difficulty making friends. Even at the higher functioning levels, sometimes they will marry later in life and could have difficulties in personal and occupational functioning because of their failure to recognize social rules. An example of this could be, we all have a personal space requirement, right? That you stand this close to strangers and this close to your friends and this close to the people in your immediate family. They might not perceive those boundaries and stand really close to somebody, and that's alienating. And so that gets in their way of normal social interaction. Communication. It could be just a mild nonverbal communication, not perceiving those social cues. Body language, tone, or inflection might be different or quirkier. It's impaired to some extent at all levels. But But in your higher functioning categories, verbal communication is usually intact. Um, Levels 2 and 3, you see difficulties with actual expressive speech. There can be echolalia or repeating of things. Sometimes they memorize long scripts, but they have no other real verbal skills. Some people are helped with sign language or communication through an iPad. Sensory processing, you have two extremes with that. Some people are insensitive to stimuli, they crave more of it, and they can be insensitive to pain. Some people experience ordinary stimuli as painful, that's the other extreme, and they seek to reduce stimulation. So that is due to, neurotransmitters and faulty signaling. People cannot process stimuli the way that a person who is unaffected would. Thinking and cognition, this our knowledge and understanding of this will evolve as we become more proficient in helping people with autism. Level 1 usually will test normally on standard tests of IQ. But levels 2 and 3, we don't really know how many people have intellectual disability because the standard tests really don't account for their needs. The language that's used in them, it's been proposed that nonverbal IQ might be a better measure of intelligence. About a third of people diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder are also diagnosed with intellectual disability. And, the other thing about this is that the category of autism has expanded so that people who used to just have a diagnosis of either mental retardation or neurological impairment are now more precisely categorized as having autism spectrum disorder. You see repetitive behaviors with autism. It's called stimming. And this is usually a way to regulate that sensory input and their response to it. It can range anything from mild quirks, like a little finger twirling, all the way to self-harm. These are the kids at level 3 who a lot of times need to be placed in residential settings with helmets. I remember one kid had to have wristbands because she just kept biting her wrists. And that was the only way that she could regulate stimulus that she felt as painful. She perceived it as painful. She had to sort of make a more painful stimulus to compete with that. Hand flapping, spinning, stereotyped behaviors with fingers and hands are common. There seems to be a need in a lot of folks with ASD for sameness, inflexible to routines, food preferences, and that can impact nutrition. And you see distress at small changes, a change in a caregiver, a change in a daily routine, a change in the way to school could trigger increased behaviors associated with autism. There are sometimes associated fine motor and gross motor delays. We see deficit in motor planning sometimes. And there are a lot of comorbid conditions that come with autism spectrum disorder. About a third, as we said, are diagnosed with intellectual disability. GI and immune disturbances, and also like a lot of those autoimmune things, eczema, allergies, asthma, seem to go with this. And there's one theory about a leaky gut that allows microdoses of toxins to accumulate in the brain because they enter the systemic circulation and cross that barrier to the brain. Frequent headaches and migraines, seizures, sleep problems, and psychiatric conditions. Sometimes you see pica and other eating disorders. As nurses, you should be aware of that potential because children have been poisoned, they have choked, eating things that aren't food. That's what pica is. It's like you pick a piece of paint off the wall and you eat it, or you eat cornstarch or something like that. And inborn errors of metabolism. That's usually the stuff you pick up on newborn screening. So I am going to take a break from this. You've seen what autism is. This video got very long the first time I recorded it, so I'm going to give you a chance to take a break and come back, and we'll talk about causation.